Hey, welcome to the Doc Analyze Anything, the show where science and psychology meet. We're talking behavior, any behavior, including a pig repeatedly walking into closed glass doors as if it's trying to enter. They're getting less. They're getting a little more like, how about this?
You might have to change the prompt up a little bit. I don't know how, but
yeah.
I mean, is this just like a pig walking through town that escaped the farm? Or are we talking about like potbelly pig that's just like my dog running into the screen when it can't tell that it's there because the glass isn't? You know what I mean? Like, I don't know.
I think either way, it's like not. It's not as. It's like it's not trying as hard anymore. What's that? So the South Park episode where they like talk about how they make a Family Guy episode. It's just like manatees hitting random balls into a bin. Yeah, I think that's what's going on here.
Regardless, it sounds delicious, and so there we go. I've always wanted to do a whole hog roast. Maybe one of these days I'll do that.
Well, if it hits its head enough times, I might have a free one.
Yeah, like where you dig the hole in the ground and then cover it in banana leaves and then build the fire over it. I've always wanted to try that.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
I did that once.
Did you? Where'd you get the banana leaves from? I don't know where to buy banana leaves.
The banana leaf store. I don't know where we got it. It was a collaborative effort, and I did not supply the banana leaves. I supplied the beer to the party, so I had very little to do with that. But I put the apple.
So you attended this once. You did not actually do that.
I put the apple in the mouth. I was part of it. I was a chef.
What is the purpose of the apple?
Integral part of the process.
What does the apple do in the cooking process?
Not enough time to explain today.
Oh, okay.
I don't know. I have no idea.
I don't think it would impart any flavor. I can see maybe so like air doesn't get trapped. But again, if you're opening the cavity, what's it matter? So I do not know why someone would use an apple in the mouth.
I was imagining somebody out there. It's how they lured the animal to them in order to capture.
And it just was still there.
Hey, free apple. Yeah. I don't know.
I'm like, I don't know where that originated from or where somebody saw it, but like, I think my first exposure was The Simpsons, where like Lisa tries to get rid of the pig that he's roasting. It's just a little dirty. It's still good. It's still good. It's just a little airborne. It's still good. It's still good. It's gone.
It's still good. It's still good. It's still good. There's that. I thought you were talking about the wild boar episode when they get like Lord of the Flies episode. And
that was good
like,
too.
Here's how the boar is surviving: slime. It's eating precious slime. And then like the next scene is the boar over a spit. Like, come on, Lisa.
The number one thing I remember from that episode is we're gonna live like kings. Damn hell ass kings.
Damn hell ass kings. Yeah. That's why every parent in the 90s was in an uproar. Like, this is the worst thing I've ever heard in my life. And they just like said swear words that didn't even matter or make sense contextually.
We'll have to start off with one monkey butler at first, but it'll train others.
How many?
All right. This is not the Simpsons episode. Today we're talking about human language and how it is basically the foundation of everything that makes people human and sets us apart from other animals. I know we've talked about with other episodes, do people think, and do animals think, and how that works. This is a little bit different. And before we get into and introduce ourselves, I think the reason I wanted to do this one, even though we'll have some overlap with other episodes, is because there are other ones I want to do, other topics in the future that you need this kind of basis for. Like, I want to do one on what is the self, or what is the concept of the self, or consciousness. But you can't talk about that without having a decent understanding of the role language plays in human behavior. So we're going to do a little bit more of a deep dive. But unfortunately, co-hosts here, I'm your host, Dr. Steven Sparks, along with always co-host Kyle Sturry and often co-host Chad Hartung. And they both have hard stops here, so we're gonna have to move through and end it early because they're jerks. So,
Kyle, I'm jealous. I want that.
I know. Yeah. I brought it back, and it's not that cool. But when you're old, it's the little things.
It's his computer. It's not the app, and so you need if you're running, what is it, a MacBook or something?
Steve tries to put me down a peg. However, I'm going to stand by it. And I'm going to do it again because I like it so much.
Anyways, I hate you all. So let's get rolling since you're cutting me short today.
Go for it.
Now I don't know where I want to start. So
get rolling.
Yeah, let's get rolling. Just silence.
Freeze.
So there's I was doing a little research on this just to see, like, anthropologically speaking, where did language come to be? There's not a clear understanding of the history of human language. There's a paper I found in BMC Biology by Mark Pagel. It talked about how the best archaeological evidence is the use of abstract or symbolic behavior, because that's all that language is symbolizing the things around you. And so looking at things like cave paintings or other symbolization in like pottery to find some sign that there may have been some language. So earliest signs of any symbolic behavior were about 150 to 200,000 years ago, in either Eastern or Southern Africa. And they're assuming that language kind of came around about this time because there's just those signs, but it's not necessarily. It could be a sign that they were starting to have some symbolic behavior, but hadn't actually had any language yet. Or it could be that you need language to have other symbolic behavior, and that's kind of where they're saying maybe this is when it occurred. It could have been as late as 40,000 years ago, where there was a real push, like flowering of, and that's his word, is the flowering of art and cultural artifacts in more modern human sites. And so it could be that this is a sign of, this is when language is really flourishing, but because there's some evidence of beforehand, and because this was in sites that I believe were in European countries, and we know that human origin, at least right now, all the evidence points to Africa, it would seem very strange that language developed after the disbursement of humans rather than beforehand, because there's so much similarity between language from one group to another. So
that makes sense. I never thought of that before.
Yeah. So a little bit background there just of how long ago we're talking about and why we can't be too concise on the evolution of language because of how long ago it was, and that we don't, I mean, you need the language to have the ability to record the history, and obviously spoken language came much before written language, and so you're not going to have a history of those early days. It says the humanity dispersed from Africa seemingly around 70,000 years ago, so it would be weird like 30,000 years later that the language came about. We've talked in the the nature versus nurture episode about genetic evidence for or other behavior. For language, it's the FOXP2 gene. And again, this is not my area of expertise, so maybe they spell it out. Maybe it's FOXP2, but if you see Fox in something, I'm going to say Fox. You know what I mean? It's just what you do.
Sounds like an old AOL screen name.
It sounds like someone played way too much Star Fox back in the 90s, and they're still who they are as a person.
Yeah,
that's how they identify.
Ooh, barrel roll.
I have a question that sparks back to something you said a few seconds ago. So when I'm thinking to myself in my brain, am I using language?
That's a fantastic question, Chad.
Yeah. And I may have done this in a previous episode, but one of my favorite things to do with people as I'm trying to get them in the mindset of understanding the role of behavior and learning in these processes. What language do you think in?
I think in English, but let me give you also a caveat. If I think in Australian, I'm thinking in speaking perfect Australian. I can't actually formulate it, but it's like perfect up here, but not perfect out.
That doesn't change the answer, because the answer didn't matter. What matters is, how did you think before you knew that language? You can react.
Did we think before? Like, was it actual like formulated sounds that we can verbalize, or was it just like pictures?
This is where maybe going back to the animal versus human behavior episode might be helpful. It really is. You can see what's around you. You can understand how to react to certain situations, even verbal commands, that sort of thing. But you can't build a full concept formation without better language. And so even at a young age, we have a 1-month-old baby in the house. Within a few months, we can start having him respond to simple commands and understanding when we say do something, you can do it. But until he has a full grasp on language, he will not understand what an object is. He will just know that when I say ball or hand me the ball, you hand the ball and now you get praise. You know what I mean? Your animal, your pet, doesn't necessarily understand a ball as a spherical object that maybe bounces, rolls, has these properties that we learn because we have the language capabilities. but they can still know how to react when you say ball. And so that's the level of language that before you know language, you can still respond to language. You can still interact with it in a way that people would think of as thinking. But when we're really talking about human thought that involves talking to yourself or the pictures or whatever else that's going on, that you've developed this concept formation, and that is another reason I wanted to go over languages, because there's a very complex part of our field called stimulus equivalence that I'd love to discuss in a kind of minor way, but explain how that basically develops what becomes what people refer to as the mind. But the first step is being able to use the language interchangeably between labeling something, asking for something, using it in a verbal conversation with somebody else, as well as knowing that the picture of something is the same as the written word of something, as the same as the spoken word of something. And that's where you get the concept formation that you can't have without this repertoire that requires language.
But to Chad's question, if I'm saying I'm thirsty out loud and I'm thinking I'm thirsty in my head, functionally, there's very little difference. It's like
Yes.
you're still responding, and this is the functional account that I think you're about to get into. You're still responding. One though just happens to be out loud, and that's like kind of the main the Chomsky Skinner debate is the function versus the structure slash cognitive mechanisms at play that Chomsky championed.
Yeah, we'll get into the Chomsky versus Skinner and all behavior analysis really debate in a little bit. And I may use linguist, synonymous with Chomsky because he is a famous linguist, but I want to make sure I'm very clear that I know a lot of linguists are actually incorporating some of Skinner's verbal behavior work in their work now. And so I don't want someone to say, hey, you're outdated, you're disparaging a whole group of people that you shouldn't be. It's really Chomsky I have a problem with. So, and from my understanding, I actually agree with him on a lot of other things. It's just language and verbal behavior that I disagree with him on. So I really shouldn't be attacking him as a person either, but that's what we do in our society. So
it's a substantive debate. He hasn't budged. I saw an interview with him recently with AC Catania, and he's like, nope, still the same. Like, oh, okay.
Well, and we'll get into it a little bit. We don't want to bog everybody down with the actual argument, but he tends to attack pieces of the argument that don't matter. You know what I mean? Like the way they're talking about it, and he'll say, oh, this is just a this, and then like, shrug it off like it's not a good point when you're not actually discussing the meat or the context of what we're discussing. But we don't need to get into that too much. Just this early on in the conversation, it's basically the traditional linguist approaches. The form of the statement is what gives it meaning, gives it power, it actually matters. And from behavior analytics standpoint, it's the function. What does it do? How does it affect those around you, the world around you, and your own behavior? That's what matters more. And so getting back to Chad's question just briefly, you can't really separate when does language start, because babies start to even recognize mom's voice in utero or those around. Like if my older boys are talking to the baby before he's born, he can start to recognize the voice, or at least based on some studies that they suggest that it's possible. So there's never a 0 point in human history where there's no, I mean, a single human's history, not all of human history, where there's zero language being at least absorbed. But prior to being able to use it in a way to really build a full concept of what an item is, it's more like what we see with animal behavior, where they can respond to the environmental stimuli in a way, and they can even, my dog can bark in different ways depending on what he wants, and I may understand, nope, this means out, this means food, whatever. They can even learn to use the buttons that say different things for one single like simple commands, but they are still responding to what the action of the listener is, rather than actually building a concept for what does get out of my house mean. And that's, I'm thinking about the one video I saw recently where there was some like people delivering something and building it, and the dog's just like human leave, like over and over again on their touchpad. You know what I mean? And so it doesn't mean that they know what it means to leave. It just means I push this button and they leave, you know? Like there's the behavior and effect rather than a full understanding. So where does this come from? Why are we different? It's not perfectly known, but that FOXP2 gene is where they think there's some evidence there that it differs from chimpanzees, which is our closest relative to humans, at least that are still around. And it differs from that chimpanzee version by 2 amino acids. And that's about it. But it influences the fine motor control of the facial muscles required for the production of speech. And so it is likely that our ability to have more complex speech may have led to some of the ability to formulate it. They suggest that Neanderthals likely did not have speech, even though they had some of these same genetic makeup, and likely had the complexity of the brain necessary to process and develop language, just because there's no signs of that symbolic behavior the same way that there are with humans. But they don't know why one would and one wouldn't, unless maybe the musculature just wasn't quite the same to allow for the production of complex sounds like we have.
That's interesting too, because chimpanzees, I love watching the videos of the people who train chimpanzees in forms of communication and who seem to really, as close to humans as I know, some of the way that, I mean, those people who like live with the like silverbacks and whatever, it's like, holy cow, they are talking with each other. They're not in the same way, but it's very, very close.
And there's so brings up the question, okay, we've seen them teach sign language to chimpanzees and other primates. If the brain is complex enough to allow for this, maybe there's some concept formation there. Now, obviously, I don't think they ever get to the point of what we see in human language usually. But we know people who can't hear can develop sign language to like the extent where they don't have any lapses in their ability to communicate compared to the spoken community. And so who knows for sure? But this is the one gene that they kind of pointed out in this article, at least, is like what sets us apart. That might be why, at least naturally, we developed language and speech where others did not. They also talk about like, is there a single source of human language? And it's because usually there are some small factors that Chomsky pointed to say, how would this come to be if there wasn't something, I'm going to use the word magical. He doesn't use magical. It's almost more mechanical in the brain that causes language to exist. We say it's human behavior that started very rudimentarily. It was shaped and evolved. And he agrees with the evolution part of it, but suggests that it's almost this mechanism in the brain that causes language to occur, even if it's not necessarily like taught specifically. We would say, okay, well, it's taught by observation, usually starts off with some sort of mimicry or the, what do we call that? The echoic behavior. You're echoing small sounds, babbling, that sort of thing. And then it becomes and evolves to match those around you more closely without a very specific teaching curriculum. But if all language kind of started in the same area and then dispersed from there, then it would make a lot more sense why there are some pieces overlapping, but now you've been removed from this other group for 20,000 years. It's not going to look or sound very much the same. And I always thought it was really interesting too, because there are those tribes that I don't know if they still do, but historically spoke mostly in clicks. And it was the consonants, I believe, that they used the clicking, different clicking noises to communicate. And that, at least seemingly, maybe there's still the vowel sounds, but seemingly is so different than any other language that it almost shows that there's less contact and that there's less overlap or remaining from wherever the original origin point might be, you know?
Yeah. I remember, like, what's the argument? Like, Chomsky's main argument was like novel sentences. Like,
Yeah.
like if I say something random, like the purple dinosaur. I think that was an
that
actual
wasn't
example that he
Chomsky.
used.
That was actually the
Okay.
reason Skinner wrote Verbal Behavior. It was like 1957 is when he finished it, I believe. Is he was at a
scorpion?
party with some other professors from other departments, and it may have been a linguist, I don't remember, but somebody was like, well, the function doesn't make sense. It can't be what's controlling this because, and he uttered a statement that seemingly like doesn't make any sense, and so has never been uttered in human history.
Something about a
He's like,
scorpion.
it's like, how would this be reinforced if it's never been spoken before? And so Sinner spent the next like several years writing a book about how that can come to be, basically. And that is,
But go ahead. Sorry.
I say that's just the basis of our scientific approach to this. That's then now, like years later, continue to evolve from there. So,
but Chomsky's argument, again, I'm not a linguist, but I know that a lot of the argument that Chomsky made, at least in the paper that he wrote, the response to verbal behavior, was that the only way that we can produce novel sentences if there's some sort of underlying like linguistic system.
Yeah, and so we've talked about that. We did the episode on novel behavior and how some of those come to be, and we talk about it a little bit with how some of this is shaped here in a few minutes. But we have to remember there's a lot of behavior that we have never done before, and there's a lot of behavior that our species has never done before that still occurs. But again, either it's accidental or it's a small change from the behavior that's already been reinforced in that situation, but it just seems different enough, but it's close enough to still achieve reinforcement. Or you're applying a behavior you have done before to a completely novel new situation, which then if it achieves that reinforcement, it'll continue. And so all those words he said there, he didn't make up any new words. You know, those were all in the repertoire. He had just never said them together before. And because he was making a point, it was reinforced to say those words in that way or that sequence. So it wasn't truly novel behavior. It was just accumulation and generalization of other behavior into a new situation. And I think that's where Chomsky would probably disagree. Like, nope, that's something brand new. And we'd be like, no, you've said all those words before. Those are all in your repertoire. You are just saying it in a way in a new situation because you see the likelihood of it being reinforced based on this scenario.
Well, and we're not going to get too much into it, but stimulus equivalence, like that line of research further explain that. Now with like the RFT accounts, it can really explain those novel novel utterances, if you will.
I don't think we're even close to getting into that, if we ever will, because you and I don't always completely agree on the that approach as well, because the framing of the relational frame theory, the frames themselves seem very similar to what Chomsky's point is. And it feels like they're trying to describe that, when I would suggest the function is what causes the behavior to evolve in a certain way. And those frames, while interesting to look at because they do tend to occur in certain patterns and in certain ways, aren't that important because it was just the evolution of the verbal behavior that caused them to become that way. It's not that there's something there that then causes it to be formulated in that way, if that makes sense. But I'm afraid we're going to lose.
We're gonna lose Chad really quick.
No,
he's already deer in the headlights here.
I was going to say, so I followed a little bit. Tell me if I'm wrong here. So is that why we switched from like used cars to pre-owned cars, because the stimulus is more positive as opposed to feeling like it has this negative connotation, or like 90% survival rate compared to 10% mortality?
Before Steve analyzes that, I'm going to say I think absolutely. I'm just going to say yes. Go ahead, Steve.
But I do think it is probably somebody said it one time and someone's like, oh, you know what? That does sound better. And I'm going to use it. And it kind of took over. I don't know that it was something, it could have been planned. It could have been someone sitting around like in a marketing office, like, all right, nobody wants to go to the used car lot, you know, and you have the picture of the dirty, like used cars is all it says on the sign. And there's someone out there trying to scam you or something, versus like certified pre-owned, you're like, oh, they really did their work to make sure this is still a good vehicle. You know what I mean? Even though all it means is you ran through it and didn't find any major issues that you could tell.
Yeah,
So,
I've got clients in the HVAC industry where they do 80-point inspections. Well, it's the same stuff they were going to do anyways, but because they highlight it as that in-depth inspection, they have a different price rate than the other guy.
Well, language evolves too, and I heard somebody at some juncture in my life give the example of like reading a Simpsons script in 10,000 years from now, and he's like Bart said, "Don't have a cow, man," and like they were not allowed to have cows back then. Like there's no way to understand the nuance, and
without getting into it too much, like how many books that religion are based on probably have those pieces in it as well. You know what I mean?
Like, the entire Bible today, yes.
I mean, yeah, generally, I think most things out there that were put out there, and not necessarily talking about the Bible, but even looking at, I was just rereading the Iliad and the Odyssey because there's a new English translation that's supposed to make a little more sense to us nowadays. And it's really supposed to just be that, the story that guides your behavior, that stops you from making mistakes that people historically have made. But when it doesn't translate to nowadays, you're like, wow, that's some wild stuff. What were they even talking about there?
Yeah.
So let's get into the evolution there, because everybody agrees there's some level of evolution to language, to verbal behavior. We've probably talked about it before, but I don't remember for sure if I do this, because I go through this with our behavior analytic folks, especially the ones that I'm supervising quite a bit. But let's talk about pre-language. You have this picture of the caveman, even though it wasn't likely the caveman, because we're talking about probably Africa, where I don't know, maybe there's a lot of caves in Africa, but I think of mountains and like what you see in the old cartoons and stuff when I think of the caveman days. But you are starting to develop the ability to make different noises, but there's no language that is based on at this point. I always like to use the example, all right, especially back in those days, you have your fire going, you have to protect it or make a new fire. It's probably important depending on food and whatever. I know there's a lot of times a little bit later in human history where there was someone that was there supposed to be tending the fire while the hunters went out to hunt, that sort of thing. Rain. If I point rain and a whole group rushes over, starts building, the cover, whatever they did, I don't know how they protected the flames so they could cook, or maybe they didn't care and I'm making this all up, but I do that. Everybody rushes over, they spend an hour doing this, and then the rain doesn't come. That is very likely to be punished. Like we don't have the language at that point, but they're like, dude, what the hell? You just made us do all this stuff. We had all more important stuff to do just because you thought maybe it was going to rain. But as it evolves, and now you have the ability to say rain, like just the inflection, and they're like, okay, maybe we should do something here, but it's not emergent. Versus then later on, you're like, think rain. You know what I mean? And now you're like, okay, it allows you to not necessarily be punished. And that is why more complexity, became important, as you can have these qualifying statements that if you don't have those, it's just purely reinforcement or punishment. There is no interverbal behavior that allows you to really make a point that says, I don't know if this is really what's going on or not. It's just likely, it might happen. I feel the rain in my bones type of thing. Like grandma's out here telling you to bring the wash in because you can feel it in your bones. I feel with my shoulders both having surgery, I'm going to start feeling rain in my shoulders any day now, but we'll see. Or like the old cartoon of the trick knee, acting up.
Yeah. Yep. There's a storm brewing. I can feel it in my bones.
Was it like Far Side where the guy's leg is just kicking rapidly because there's rain coming or something? But you can see something that simple and why it's necessary to evolve more complex language to really be able to share information with the rest of the group. And then from there become even more complex because now I can share things that I have learned with future generations so they don't have to experience it for themselves and then build upon that. We're talking about early days of survival. They probably weren't thinking about fun stories just to keep kids entertained, but I can tell you a story that'll help you learn a lesson to help you become a better part of our hunter-gatherer group or something along those lines. And so because it, was shaped this way, and the reaction to the people around you, and like, there's always this discussion of, Skinner didn't talk much about the listener. I say that, like, you don't have to really worry about that, because once the speaker stops speaking and then the other party becomes the speaker, then you immediately become the listener. When they stop, if you have a response, you immediately become the speaker again. Like, you may even be repeating it to yourself, but you're still the speaker in your own head, repeating it to yourself. And so the listening behavior is just absorbing the content. There is still behavior there to an extent, maybe not, but it's mostly neuroelectrical. What's of interest is what is being said and why, that sort of thing. But you can see why, in order to have the right effects, and like, okay, he didn't get punished when he said, I think it's going to rain. When I said, hey, it's going to rain, I did. So now my frugal behavior is going to more start taking this form that this other person has said, because I see their reinforcement or lack of punishment, and it'll take a common form and become more functional because other people will understand what you're trying to communicate. Versus this idea that the sentence it occurs the way it does because it has meaning the way it does, and that's kind of a very shorthand, not going to go into it, not really going to hammer in on the linguist approach, because it's much more complex than that. There's many parts of speech have different meaning and gives things different, I'll say, power based on what the linguist approach is. But that's not my expertise. I don't know that I could really do it justice by describing it when I'm just going to disagree with it anyways. And so what's the point kind of here? So we were actually, Kyle and I are having a discussion with another one of our team members recently, because she likes to just randomly throw out ideas to us via text and then see how I and we respond. I usually say something outlandish. Kyle reels it back in, and I'm like, all right, fine. I'll take the time to actually respond correctly and tell you what I think scientifically. We really need to get Cora on here just to randomly throw a wrench in all of our discussions.
We tried, and she apparently has the worst computer ever made. Didn't work at all.
That was a different show, but yes. And the other one, I think there was a sick baby involved when she was supposed to join us for the Battle of the Sexes to take Taylor's side against us. But the example I used with describing why function matters rather than the form is, it's like saying that a wheel is important because it is the form it is. Where we're saying a wheel is important because it rolls. You know what I mean? The function, the ability to move things more freely, to move a rock that is now a shape of wheel more freely, whatever those earlier uses were when it was first developed, it was the function of it that made them continue to make wheels and use them and have those evolve into something that we use almost constantly in today's world. It wasn't because there's something special about the idea of the wheel that now it naturally has meaning and is important. It is because of how it functions. And so if I say, let's see if I had the example here. Let me just go back to, I think it's going to rain. Or I'll say I'm cold. I could be doing what Skinner described as a mand, which is he derived this from command, demand, whatever it is, where the object, or it doesn't even have to be the spoken object, but whatever it is you're discussing, the delivery of that is the reinforcer. So I'm cold could mean I am asking for a blanket. It could be a tact that it's cold in this room. I don't need anything. I'm just making a statement saying that it's cold here. And that's really important with children, like learning hot and cold is being able to tact the environment and then receive that reinforcement of like, you're right, it is cold in here, and not have it just be about getting that need met necessarily. It could be that, and we're all taking here. So we'll use Dr. Meow Meow. He sees a girl he's interested in at the bar we were talking about in the last episode about dating behavior. And he's like, hey, it's cold in here. Not because he cares about getting warmer, not because he's actually cares that it's cold in here, but he's breaking the ice and having a reason to start a conversation with an attractive stranger. Is it that we call that one introverbal, where it's the back and forth language that's shared between the people is what's reinforcing, not the praise or the attention for, label and not whatever item is being delivered. And there's other functions we can go over real quick as well, but it's the same thing. You could even have the same inflection. You could have, monotone, no, emotion to it whatsoever, and it could still mean any of those three things. So the form of it doesn't matter to us as much as the function is like, all right, why did they say that? And then are they really asking for a blanket? Because it'd be a lot more effective to say, hey, can I have a blanket? You know what I mean? Or can you turn the heat up a little bit? Or is it I'm learning the difference between hot and cold? And like someone else is like, I think it's pretty warm in here. And like, maybe it starts an interverbal conversation and now you're learning the art of small talk, that sort of thing. There's
and
a
that's
lot
where
going on.
Chomsky saying that reinforcement alone was insufficient to account for language and verbal behavior. I don't just having known behavior analysis, but I don't understand why it would be insufficient. Like when you think of it in that range, like that example alone it makes so much sense to me. Like I might say hi for 10 different reasons, and it could be very different than why that person beside me said hi. The whatever theorized cognitive mechanism that accounts for that aside, there's still a reason that I say it in the tone I said it in, with the inflectuation I said it in, and based on a history of experience with like greeting other people, it can change over time too.
It was clear reading his original response from the 1950s, that he did not truly understand the extent to which reinforcement works. And I think that still happens a lot today, where people picture. I mean, the first time when I first started learning this in like the undergrad, and my dad's like, "That's cool and all, but no one's following me around with a piece of candy." I'm like, "Well, like it's much more than that. A smile or a glance from a stranger on the street will have much more impact on your behavior than you could ever imagine." And so if you did something in that moment that they weren't even reacting to, they just happened to smile and be friendly, you might start doing that more and more often just because that was reinforced. And there was no planning there. There was no someone walking around saying good job. Our examples often include that because we're such in a teaching and training behavior mindset in our field, but it is anything that follows a behavior that increases the future frequency. And he was, I think, looking at it more in terms of someone walking around delivering reinforcement, or kind of what we talked about before is there's no history of reinforcement for this particular behavior. So obviously something else has to be going on. When I think it's without studying the science, it becomes hard to understand how that novel behavior really comes about. And like, I think we did a decent justice in that episode, but I still don't think that it really, without having this full like conceptualization of how these things work and interwork together, you can truly understand how a repertoire presented in a new area will seem completely novel, even though it's really not to the organism. It may even seem novel to the organism. They're like, oh, look what I did. Like, it's cool. It came out of nowhere. But somewhere, the stimuli in the environment occasioned the behavior, which then achieved the reinforcer. And like, it didn't just happen magically. Like there seems to be and that's, I guess, my issue with it is, it seems too magical if there's just something in our brain that does it. You know what I mean? There's no learning process. There's nothing actually happening there. It's just, hey, we, you evolved this thing and all of a sudden, poof, there's full language. Another one that I wanted to get to this before we get to is, the feral children, the ones that have been living without experiencing language, and the fact that they don't have language like magically, naturally, would suggest that though there might be parts of the brain and genetics that allow us to have language, it is still something that has to be learned. It's not something that just occurs to us.
Didn't they, in those those were really sad accounts, but they were interesting case studies nonetheless. But when they found children who were essentially, raised in the forest or something like that without any interaction with humans at all, they still, well, A, they were able to teach them language a lot of times. B, I could be wrong about that. I feel like that's what I remember from those stories. But B, they seemed to have, or people recognized that there were some patterns that they could classify as communication that they had learned just kind of on their own. But but I forget the exact instances. So
Well, we're gonna do a deep dive and actually look up that, because it's been a few years since we did. Yes, right now. Does everybody sit around and wait an hour? I'll be right back. We did discussions on this as a group of behavior analysts. What was it, a couple years ago? I think we talked about some of these cases. And I don't want to speak on it too much without going back and looking at it. But there's what one professor I had called preschool fatalism. Like the things that you learn at a young age are going to be more likely to maintain. And obviously, if you start learning at 2 or 1 this language, you have all this time to develop a more complex language compared to learning it at 40. But we still have people in their 40s that, because language doesn't happen magically, because we know how to reinforce it naturally so it becomes a natural part of the world around them, that we do start seeing language occur and appear in people that they've never seen it in, just because of the way we were developing communication using picture cards and other things like that even.
Right.
And so, and I do remember at least a few of those cases where those children, because they were still young, but not as young as you would have liked, were able to start developing language quite well, just based on, being around people after the fact. And that, again, going back to the autism episode, brings up the question, like, we don't know why, but why is it that some people don't acquire language, even though we can still teach it? We just have to be much more methodical about teaching it, because it just doesn't occur naturally. So, Chad, before we go on to anything else, just to describe things a little bit further, where are you at with all this? Are we making sense? Have we lost you completely? Are you just like, what the hell are you guys even talking about at this point?
No, I'm not lost, and I'm like running scenarios that I've experienced, in the past as you're kind of describing them. So it's kind of like putting a little bit of the why behind some things. And one thing I was curious about, like, I go to a lot of networking events for business, and there's just so many conversations happening. And if I hear my name, it just cuts through all the noise, and that is my focus. And in sales, we've learned to use the name regularly to kind of like refocus the person that something important is about to be said. And I'm curious if you have any thoughts about like why, I guess it would be just a sound that we identify as our name, but why some particular sound would be so important that it can just grab our attention in this sea of noise that sometimes occurs.
That has to do with salience, really, the obviousness of the stimulus in the environment and the history of reinforcement. If you think about your likelihood of getting something out of a conversation with somebody that is talking about you specifically rather than some random small talk, I'm guessing you have a much stronger history of reinforcement in those conversations versus the random stuff. And so, you had this long history. You can't even pinpoint those examples in your history. But, all right, I either am more likely to get a sale because someone's talking about something I do, or make a new connection because someone's talking about me and maybe they are in a field that'll be helpful with me, versus this person I already know and we already have this connection, or this person I don't really care to know anymore because obviously we're not in line with each other with some of these things. Those experiences will now make it where that stimulus causes and affects your behavior much more strongly than all the other language going on around you. And so it'll become much more obvious to you and start creating this motivation to behave in a way that causes that potential reinforcement to occur again. And so it really is just, go ahead.
I was going to say it also, I mean, if you just think about like evolution and selectionism, like that, your certain sounds that you've developed a history with, like you're inundated with noise all day and 99% of it's completely meaningless. Like I'm probably hearing 30 different sounds right now that I'm not even like aware of, quote unquote. But if I heard my name silently across the room, that history of reinforcement and punishment with that stimulus of that name. My dog is sleeping on the couch right now, probably fast asleep. But if I said the name Emmy, she just rolled over and looked at me like that sound woke her up. I've been saying sounds this whole time, but I just said her name and she just did a complete somersault over and like, what the hell?
Because it's a warning stimulus that you have to get out of Dodge before you get a punishment, or because there might be reinforcement coming. We used to play a game with our
Cal
dog.
doesn't beat his dog. I know that. It's definitely a positive thing. It's treats coming.
Well, it could be getting yelled at for something too. But we, our dog that we just unfortunately had to put down, Leela, we'd play a game where we'd sit there at night, she's sleeping, and we'd say sounds that sounded closer to her name. And the closer you got, like you'd say like lunar, and you see like one tail wag. And then like Lou, and you get a few, but she doesn't pick her head up. And then like, all right, Leela, and she picks up, gets excited, comes running over to you. And like you could see, depending on how similar that stimuli in the environment is, depends on how much it's affecting behavior. But she's not sitting there thinking about, oh, they're going to say my name or not. It is just that natural reaction based on her history of reinforcement when she hears her name.
Yeah.
I had a really interesting experience yesterday. I was having a conversation with one person at a networking event, and Amy was, we were like back to back talking to two different people. And she was talking with this person, and I knew she was back there, but I wasn't like paying attention by any means. She said something like, and this is my husband, Chad, over here. I heard Chad, and then my brain was able to like rewind and hear like the last four words that were said to kind of like, that is interesting to me, that I essentially was like passively hearing the conversation, just not fully processing.
That is, I mean, look at the room around you. Every little thing. I have like a couple hundred books, pictures, TV, hats on the wall. All these things around me are all stimuli that could occasion behavior at any time. But to me, in this situation, based on what's reinforcing, which is, spewing knowledge that maybe people don't actually care to hear, and hearing myself talk as much as conversing with a couple friends, is much more reinforcing in this moment. But at any point, if a flashing light or something, draws my attention, now I'll be much more aware of all of it, including the stuff that I've been taking in up to this point. And it's interesting. They say the reason that life seems to go by faster the older you get is not because of an actual play in the brain, but they believe it's because as a young child, all this stuff is novel. So you're taking it all in. The older you get, the more you've already experienced it all. And so the less salient, the less obvious it is to you. You're not taking the time to observe all the little details of the world around you. You're just going through the motions and only looking at the important stuff to you at that moment. And so you're missing a lot of that time that's occurring.
And that's the real lesson today. Enjoy the little things, everybody.
I think my wife would hear, so I get to redecorate every year.
Yeah. For some people, that's a huge reinforcer, and if you can afford it, sure. I worry about the waste, but I'm also like, that seems tiring to me. Like, I don't know that I can ever just be satisfied with anything. You know what I mean? Like, I'll always find like, oh, I wish this was a little bit different in my house or something like that. But the time and the effort to actually fix it or change it sounds horrible.
We just move all our existing things around.
Yeah,
we do.
We don't. We just complain about it.
Yeah.
So
also reinforced.
Right. There's other parts of language we'll touch on real quick because we don't have a lot of time left, but things that I think Chomsky and others might say, well, what about this? This, like, how does this work? You know what I mean? And so, like, metaphors, ways to basically explain or help you understand or contact something that you'll never experience or contact, but it gives you more information. You talk about both metaphorical and metonymical text extensions. We're not going to go that crazy into things, but metaphorical text extension, as he talks about it, think about it in terms of one of his examples where my foot's asleep. There are stimuli involved with being asleep that are similar to or overlap with when your foot falls asleep. The fact that it is not responding to stimuli the way it does naturally. It's like when you're sleeping and you're not responding to the world around you. There's other parts of it, like the idea of pins and needles. There's not actually pins and needles sticking to your foot, but you've been poked with a needle before, and this is a similar feeling that you have when your foot's asleep. These are metaphors for that feeling that then become a description of that feeling itself, even though your foot's not actually asleep and you're not actually feeling pins and needles. And so with the metaphors, it usually is, there's enough overlapping stimuli between the description of two different things that now allows you to understand and almost experience something that you would not have experienced otherwise, which I think is pretty interesting, and where that kind of thing arises from.
I have to tell you, I thought you've been saying Chauncey this whole time, and my brain goes, Billups. And it takes me back to going to Pistons games. And then I pick back up on what you said about 5 words later, and then
Noam Chomsky, the famous
There you go.
linguist.
But that's a good example, though. That's what we're talking about. That is a history of learning there with it. Kind of would that be metonymical text extension? It's like an irrelevant, arbitrary feature of the stimulus, and it's kind of not really.
It's not a perfect example,
more like it,
but it is. Yeah, it fits with how we're describing things and how they can occasion. And now, anybody listening to this may now equate. There might be some seamless equivalence between Noam Chomsky and Chauncey Billups that there's almost no other overlap other than that they are humans. Otherwise, you know what I mean? And so.
We both suck at basketball.
Don't get us started with it.
Shots fired.
Who knows? Maybe Chomsky was involved in some betting scandal or something. Maybe there's some overlap there too. I'm not sure.
Maybe.
But
I had fodder that I forgot about. You don't see Reggie Miller get in trouble with the FCC, or not FCC, SEC.
Yeah, I don't even know about that one. Like, sure, he was at these celebrity games as a celebrity, but did he really know it was a mob thing to launder money? Who knows? Like, you can't.
Is it really illegal to launder money?
Is it really? Like,
is it illegal for you to be the attraction for others to launder money? Is the point, and probably only if you know it's occurring. And I think that's where it comes down to: is did he know that was the purpose of these celebrity poker games or not? I don't know, but
yeah.
I am also not an attorney because I think much of law is not logical. It's more about winning than actually having a reason to punish people. So
not logical.
Yeah. The only other piece, and we're just about at our time limit here, was autoclitic behavior, and that's going back to that. I think it's going to rain versus rain. You know, these qualifying statements that allow you to both achieve reinforcement and avoid punishment based on changing the meaning just slightly. So functionally, it still works the same way, but it is not so kind of hardcore that it's like a all or nothing type thing. And it's much more complicated than that, but that's where all the little inner pieces of our language occur. You know, the function is rain. I think it is all those other parts of that autoclitic behavior that now allow it to have more context and prevent you from maybe being punished the way you would have been.
More control.
Not super important, but that kind of explains why and how all these other pieces evolved to make our one solid language. So I know Chad's got his hard stop because he's a horrible person, but we love him anyway. So
my bad.
We speed rushed. So we did a speed round on language.
Yeah, it was. This is like a probably multi-year class that you would take that we've tried to squeeze into less than an hour. So
look at that. You don't have to do the whole 2 years. You can just do this 54-minute rundown.
Yeah, I really wanted to get into like slang language and how that evolves and then disappears over time and the different pieces of culture, but I think we did a good enough picture of like how that would come and go. And this basically does the listener reinforce it. If it does, you'll do it more than others will pick it up. And then eventually the next generation will be like, you guys sound stupid, and they'll stop using it. Maybe or maybe not.
You see, part 2 coming soon, huh?
Yeah, maybe we'll see. But I think because we got to go, let's end it here. Just remember to be positive. Use that positive behavior. Use your autoclitics so you don't achieve too much punishment and you still get the reinforcement. And just be careful out there because you never know when language will evolve without you and all the kids will think you're stupid. And just be careful out there.
Times. Yep.
They're all going to laugh at you.
Yeah, they're all going to laugh at you.
Keep up, folks.